I'm Claire Watson, head of the Applied Art Department in the College of Home Economics here at Iowa State. We return this afternoon to the theme, Families in Transition. And I'm pleased that there is an opportunity to consider the aspects of the quality of life in examining this important issue, families of the future. To paraphrase words of a master teacher, man does not live by bread alone. We have with us this afternoon an artist and an author, Mrs. Esther Warner Dendle, who comes to us from her studio in Costa Mesa, California. I refer to her biography in the packets which you have received. And you will learn in reading of her life that it is indeed and has been a most creative one. I know of no one better qualified to speak at this time and this place concerning the aesthetics and the quality of life, Mrs. Esther Warner Dendle.
Well, it's certainly a pleasure to come back to Iowa State and meet people who were in school with me here, and teachers who were my teachers here. And so it seems like to meet new friends. What a wonderful family reunion, speaking of families. As Robert Andre said, the art spirit makes of all men who have it brothers. And so in that sense, I think the group here is a family, and it's nice to have a family reunion. I should like to begin with a statement, and as I give it, think to yourselves whom you think might have said this. The quote is this: "The most important thing in the life of any human is to have interesting thoughts." Now, are you guessing who did say it? You might think it was a student, maybe from Berkeley, sitting on the rooftop watching the sunset, or was this some school dropout who's kind of rebelling against the academe as we know it? No, this was Elizabeth Peterson, and the time goes back into the 30s when she was on the extension staff here. And I was so struck with what she said that I've never forgotten it. And I've thought about it in all these years since. I was then a little 4-H girl from Marshall County at a 4-H club convention. Now, she didn't say how you'd go about having interesting thoughts, but I'm glad she didn't, because if she had told us, maybe her way wouldn't have been our way, and I would have forgotten all about it. I think what startled me about what she said, maybe the reason I remembered it all these years, is that no one had ever suggested to me that I had an obligation to enjoy myself, to enjoy my own thoughts. This was a whole new idea, and it took hold with great force. Well, then I thought about this off and on, and halfway through school here, and I went down to Appalachia to work. It was called the Southern Highlands then, but now we say Appalachia, and I was still thinking about it. And I noticed that the people in Appalachia seemed to get so much out of life, and that this had nothing to do, or if it with their material possessions, or if it did have anything to do with it, it seemed almost in inverse proportion. It almost seemed as though the poetry in their speech and their humor and the delightful phrasing that I found and the square dances were a defense against dreariness and poverty and failed hopes. And so I began to wonder whether prosperity and boredom do not have very often a direct relationship that someone who does research might investigate for us. I read an article, I think this was about 1965, by Bernard DeVoto. And this was in Holiday magazine. And if you read Holiday, it's all about how to have fun. And so here was a strange title, Heavy, Heavy Hangs Over Thy Head. And I thought, what a strange thing to have in a vacation magazine. And I didn't really want to read anything that sounded that dreary, but just because it was by Mr. DeVoto, whom I admired, I did read it. And in the article, he tells about a family who are having their first trip to Yellowstone Park. They roar up to Old Faithful Geyser, and cameras in hand, ready to leap out and photograph the moment the geyser shoots skyward. But oh dear, Old Faithful has just done it, and is not going to do it again for almost an hour. Well, what to do? Gloom settles over the family. No one has enough imagination to get out of the car and see what kind of a tree they're parked under, or what kind of rocks are lying on the ground. They can't leave because they have had so many slideshows inflicted on them that they have to retaliate, a kind of tit-for-tat kind of thing. And so drearily they wait out the minutes that are left until they can get the picture and roar on down the road. Now, Mr. DeVoto was using that as an example. He was saying that the heavy, heavy that hangs over the head of America is not the threat of the population bomb or the atom bomb. It's the threat of leisure time that people do not know how to use. In other words, people are bored, literally bored to death. It's been shown that people who have something wonderful to live for, to anticipate, even if they're ill, seldom die until that thing has happened that they're anticipating. And so we know that boredom is a great problem. And it may be that because we are so affluent in this country, there are many reasons why it might be more of a problem in our culture than in some other cultures. Now, instead of telling you about my own experiences in Appalachia, I would like to tell you about a book that I wish all of you might enjoy. The name of this book is The Doll Maker, and it was written several years ago by a woman named Harriet Arno. The woman of the story, the doll maker, is a woman named Gertie Nevels. She lives in Kentucky. They're on rented land, and they long for a little patch of land of their own. Gertie loves everything that grows. And I think you get a new feeling for the way that things grow by seeing it through her eyes. And that's really why I want you to read the book. Someone gives her a potted fern, and she looks at it and feels sorry for it because it's in a pot. So she takes it to a limestone ridge and puts it where it belongs. Well, Gertie eventually goes to Detroit, and if you follow her there through the terrible days she lived through, her husband's laid off work, the money's all gone, there's nothing in the refrigerator, children are hungry. Gertie has brought with her a beautiful hunk of wild cherry, and she dreams about carving it because she's always whittling, always carving. And her husband argues with her. He wants her to cut up the wood, or that wood, or any wood she can get, and he'll fix a bandsaw. He'll turn out little dolls by the dozen on a kind of an assembly line basis. Then she can just sort of smooth them up a little and call them hand-carved, and they'll have something to eat. Well, this is a terrible decision for Gertie to make because it offends everything she believes in her soul. And I won't tell you the decision, but you read it and find out. I think when her husband is arguing with her and trying to get her to do this, I reread his argument. I'd heard it before, but in many dialects, but I wanted to hear it in mountain speech. Now he argues, Clovis, the husband, argues with Gertie, and he yawns. They've been all through this so many dreary times before, and he's bored with it. And he says to Gertie, there's millions and millions of crosses. They're talking about crucifixes now. There's millions and millions of crosses with a feller on them they call Christ. And they're all out of sawed lumber with the Christ straight agin 'em and glued on. And now you want to change them. That's one of your big problems, Gert. You won't give in to being like other people. But it's something millions of people got to do it. And the sooner they do it, the better. That's Clovis. Well, then just recently, I read Future Shock by Alan Toffler. I'm sure that many of you have read Mr. Toffler's book. And it seemed to me, I sort of laid Clovis's speech against Mr. Toffler's. And I think Mr. Toffler has put Clovis's argument into proper business English. Well, you go to Detroit with Gertie Nevels and you ask yourself if you really want her to adjust. Then we might leave Gertie and go to an interesting trip to some of the communes of this country where the young people have gone to really to try to find what Gertie Nevels already had in Kentucky, this love of the earth and of growing things. And this, in a way, I think is sort of a sad story too, because I don't think it's going to work to try to make a way of life out of raising radishes and making sandals, because one returns always to this annoying fact that under all human endeavors, there has to be some economic base. And there's a book I think you would enjoy, which follows the problems of 16 young people living in a commune in New England. And the name of this book is What the Trees Said. And the young man who wrote it lived in this commune. His name is Stephen Diamond. Well, Stephen and his family are looking for true, honest answers. And he tells you in the book what it's like to live on the land and have a feeling for the land. He'll tell you what it's like to smell the new spring grass and to milk a cow and to see a garden, a huge garden that looks to him like a great pieced quilt on the earth. Well, what about the economic base of this commune? They have $40.16 per person, not including car expense. This is what they have to get along. And those who, some of them, of course, have to go outside and get jobs and then put the money in the kettle. And they consider this a great disaster to have to leave the garden, leave the haying, leave the milking, and go out and get a job. Well, now, I, too, have weeded the garden and milked a cow and helped make hay. And the difference between me and Stephen Diamond is that I was not ecstatic about it. Now, my mother said that we had a wonderful life, that we had the best life in the world. But I thought the good life ought to include some things which ours didn't. A new dress to graduate from high school, for instance. Well, having lived now in many different cultures in many different parts of the world, I'm ready to milk the cow. I'm ready to help make the hay and dig the potatoes, and I think get out of it what these kids in the commune are looking for. So I realize there can be magic in anything, in doing anything creatively. But the magic is not in the cow. The magic is in the milker. The magic is not in the potatoes. It's in your head while you dig them. And magic is a very elusive thing. Chasing it is like chasing a firefly. Just when you think you have it, you don't. And so it's something that has to be explored by each of us and worked at. And if we get a little bit of it to hold for quite a bit of our lives, we're one of the very fortunate few. Now, I think this is what our young people are telling us, that they do not want our answers. They want to find their own. I know when I went to Appalachia, I was to teach people how to can tomatoes. The children had rickets and young mothers lost their teeth and the diet was terrible. So it was decided in Washington, D.C. that the answer to this was very simple. They would just send people like me out and get everybody to canning tomatoes. Well, it didn't quite work that way. The trouble with it was that the people were not interested in canning tomatoes. The answers were coming from on top, and those people wanted to find their own answers. And maybe that's what's going on today. It seems to me that if anyone's going to listen to any of us, they're going to listen to the person in whom they feel, and this is something you don't need to talk about, but when people talk to you or with you, they know whether you've caught any of the magic of living. And if you haven't, they turn away, no matter how much you know about canning tomatoes or whatever. Now we're talking about the land and the strength that comes from a feeling for the land and living on it. But sometimes this magic thing happens in urban situations. There's another book I think every one of you would enjoy, and it's called The Me Nobody Knows. Some of you have maybe read this. It's a book of stories, creative writing, written by kids from the ghetto. And no attention is paid to spelling, pronunciation. It's just to get the thought and the feeling. And one of the most delightful, I think, is a story of written by an 18-year-old. He's gone to work in a plastics plant, and it's a dreadful job. The plastics smell bad, and he's there 40 hours a week when he'd rather be out doing something else. But when he came to write a story on it, he had a marvelous feeling of empathy about these fountain pens he was making. He imagines that he's a fountain pen, and he's moving drowsily along the assembly line, and all at once he feels a twitch. The little part with the ink has been inserted, and he jumps. And then, while he's still apprehensive, the cap is put on him, and he just rolls right off the assembly line. Now, this is a kid that lived among burnt-out cars, overturned cars, rubbish heaps, weedy, empty lots, nothing of beauty in his life, but yet there, in poverty and in a bad environment, his imagination was able to rise and enter into a dreary job. This, I think, is what we're talking about when we talk about finding the magic in life. Then I would like to tell you about a community we visited in Africa. This is Oshogbo, Nigeria, a town of 120,000, so we're in an urban situation now. A man and his wife went to live there. His name was Ule Bayer. He was an Austrian, and his wife's name, she was also an artist, Suzanne Wenger. And they were so enjoying the imagination among the Yoruba people. It just seemed to flow. Anybody could tell a story and make it up on the spot, and it was wonderful. So they said, let's start an art workshop. But we're not going to teach good design. We're not going to say a word about what's good or bad. We will teach only technique. You know, if the kids are going to make jewelry, we'll show how to make jewelry. But that's it. Then we will not show photographs of anything of Western art. This is to be strictly an outpouring of each person's own personality. So they started in like that. And all the things that have flowed out from Oshogbo. A man gave his house to be a workshop. And it's just a beat-up old mud house with 3 or 4 mud rooms, but the things that have come from those rooms. Now, when these young people who came to the workshop looked across the street, they saw an Esso station, and it was a typically Western gas station. It was just a glass box, utterly unsuited to the tropics, no overhang to protect against sun and rain, and it just stuck up there among the mud houses like a sore thumb. So they said, well, now let's, number one, try to make that ugly filling station beautiful. And number two, let's make it African. Let's not have this Western thing sticking up here. So they talked to the man that owned the station, and he said, well, yes, you kids can do this, but I won't pay you, and I won't furnish any material. Well, a number of these young men had already been in trouble for petty theft, and they said, oh, don't bother, it's no problem. We'll get the stuff. And next morning they had the cement and the structural steel and the whole kit and caboodle. And Professor Beyer didn't ask where they got it. So when you see the slides, you will see how they completely beautified and Africanized that Esso station. People come from halfway around the world to see it. And you'll see in the slide what was done. Now, I wonder how we could learn from that. What would happen, if we did that? If we just took kids off the street and said, here's a bunch of stuff, just do what you want with it. And I really wish we could try that. Just teaching nothing but technique and keeping our mouths shut, except to say, is this really original now? Is this, because, art should only happen once. Once is enough. Now, after the kids finished the filling station, they thought they really should do something about the sacred forest. So Suzanne Wenger, who was then Mrs. Beyer, said, all right, what do we need to do to the forest? Well, first of all, they need a fence, a cement fence, because the goats go into the forest and they knock over the images, and so they can't have that. So they built the fence. And she noticed that as the people worked, they had an irresistible urge to scratch into the wet cement and start sculpting it. So she encouraged that. Now this fence is built of mud, and then it's cemented over a thin coat of cement, and you'll see the kind of things when we show the slides that they scratched just without planning, just impetuously scratched into that. And then as you go into the shrine, the gateway to the shrine, it's a most tremendous emotional experience because you crawl through sort of tunnel-like a labyrinth, and it's like a birth experience, and that is exactly what it's meant to be. You are to be reborn, a child of the land. You'll see it in the slide, but of course the slide can't give you the feeling of crawling through it and emerging a different person on the far side. Now, I should like to say just a little thing about play. I think that both in Appalachia and during the years I lived in Africa, I learned a lot about the relationship of play to creativity. I know that many great designers who are in the designing business say that when a person they employ loses his sense of play, he is no longer any good to that organization, whether he's just out of college or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60. The age makes no difference. The aging, being old, means having forgotten how to play, and some people are dreadfully aged at 21. I think maybe I was, but Africa kind of changed that in my life. Now, a book that we don't have time today to explore the relationship between play and creativity. But a man has done it much better than I could do it, and I suggest you read him. It's a book called Creativity by Arthur Koestler, and he shows how humor, how invention, how great art began as play, and how many things we have that were invented as playthings. For instance, the microscope was a plaything before it was an instrument of science. The telescope was a plaything before it was directed to the heavens. And some people think that playfully painting the body led to the invention of clothing. So one thing we can learn from people, they're called primitive people, really they aren't, they're very sophisticated, but people like country and tribal Africans know the secret of being creative through a playful spirit. And I think when you play, you don't have to have a result, a useful thing. In fact, you could take some definitions of play and say, if you're really playing, what you make doesn't, you should not have any utility. Now, a sand castle on the beach, the next wave washes it away, and you're playing when you make it. But I have great difficulty working with adults, getting them to play, unless it's kind of a side effect, they can have some product. I guess we've been raised to be practical, and we can't just play for its own sake. But in teaching the fabric arts, and especially needle weaving, I try to get people just at first just to play with string. And all across Africa, I was playing with string because it was something the Africans understood. And I'd have a ball of yarn or cord in my pocket. I'd get some out and make a cat's cradle. And then you come to a place, where someone has to help you, or you can't carry on. It's just there, and that you can't do any more yourself. So then you get that far and look very helpless, and some little child will come running out from behind a hut, and he'll carry on with you. And in 5 minutes, the whole village is around there, and you're all friends. It gives you a place to start. And so I think all kinds of play with string and play with braids, all of those things, you do have some product. In fact, a very nice product. I brought some needle weaving today, and if I have time, I'll show you. At least you get a little element of play introduced into the thing. Now, one of the people who has worked out games, and you mustn't call these art games, because if people think it's art, they won't play. They'll be afraid, and they back right off. But this little game was invented by Sister Corita Kent of Immaculate Heart College. And her game is very creative because you take words or phrases out of context and put them together in a new way. Now, this is the whole essence of creativity and of invention. So she will take, something familiar like Fly the Friendly Skies of United, and it comes out on a serifgraph, Fly United. Now, I wish Sister Carita were here to show you how she plays her game, but since she isn't here, I will show you how I played it. Now, you can make your own rules for this game, and that's true of all good games. You make your own rule. Now, if the game is already, the rules are already made, like bridge or, most games, it isn't as playful as though you invent the rule. So you invent the rule for this game, and I decided it would be more fun if I took an unlikely source. So I decided I would confine my exploration to one magazine. And I chose the Wallace's Farmer because it's all full of ads about pigs and corn and farm machinery. And then the goal of my game was to find a kind of a philosophy of life out of the ads or the text and make a banner out of it. Because I thought anybody can make a banner. If you don't sew, you can paste felt together. And probably you'll see these better on the slides, but I'll just hold them up so you can see how I went through with a yellow marker, these see-through markers. Now, the way I made my game up, I had no idea what I would get, I would, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, I'd take it. That was the rule I made. Now, one of these ads says, "Go ahead, worm them the old way. It's your money." And they have some really runty pigs. I don't know where they got such runts in Iowa. Now, another one of these says, on the go ahead, worm them the old way, it's your money. I just took go ahead. And then they show you the beautiful rear end of a whole batch of pigs, and it says grow winners. So I took grow. And here we're to buy some kind of machinery, and it says move up to it. So I took move up. And somewhere here, there's something about we expect to revive farm credit. So I took expect to revive. Now I'll show you what I did with them. Now, the whole family can play this game, or a whole club could play it. And I think the great value of it is that it gets you away from your, every one of us begins to think after a while in a rut. And you think the same old stupid things over and over. All of us do. So this is a way to spark up, and get some new thoughts and stir up the whole family with the thing. And so I hope you'll play it and introduce it to your friends. But as I mentioned before, don't say this is art, or they won't play. Just say, oh boy, I got a good game, let's play, and then they will. Now we'll go to the slides, and I believe that you'll see better if you just listen with your right ear and turn your chairs so you see the screen. And perhaps those in the back would like to come over here and stand, because there are only a few slides. So we'll take just a minute to get adjusted. We'll give the people in the back room time to move.
While they're moving, they couldn't see it in the other room. Would you explain this that you just showed?
Yes, yes. They're in the slides, so we'll see it there. Can everybody see the screen now? We believe that the use of tools, which I really wanted to talk about, but I ran out of time, is very important. And if you would like the opinion on that of someone who is not an artist, but who is a very well-known and even a controversial educator, Ivan Illich has said a great deal about this, that the way to keep technology from running us is for each of us to become a user of simple tools. He wants everybody to build their own house. We did that before we ever heard of Mr. Illich, but our experiences doing it certainly lead me to say amen to what he has said about this. Now, our idea was not to build a great house or a grand house, but to build a house where we would know every nail hole, where we would quarry all the stone, where we would mix the cement, where our hands were involved in every part of it. So we show you just 2 or 3 slides of our home, and we hope you'll come to see us sometime and see more of it. You're in our living room now. And we'll go on to the next one. I think a house, a home without books is a very, well, I just can't imagine living in one. And so here the books are our friends and ready for us to reach. We quarried all the stone in this fireplace. We would go on a Sunday and dig as much as we could in one day, and we have altogether 32 tons of stone in our home. Now we're in Nigeria, and this is the filling station that the kids beautified and Africanized. And as you go to the next slide, you'll see a detail of part of this screen that they put around it. You see here the scenes of daily life. People are drinking palm wine, and some drink too much, so they fight, and some have the backache, and and they're just doing what people do. Every one of these is just a joy. Now, it's a marvelous thing to have a car. You see, your arms can be very skinny if you have a big steering wheel to take you. And being a hunter is pretty good, too, because that makes you a powerful man. And just being a woman isn't bad. And this I included so you could see how they did it. You see, they formed all of these figures and animals out of construction steel. And then they tied this all together with more steel. And then they patted the cement onto and into these armatures. This is the little club across the road from the Esso station, Mabari Maboya. When we see, we will be happy. And this is where they work and talk and grow. this is, well, many of the homes in Ashogbo now have cement sculpture in the windows because people have learned to do it here at the Mabari Club. Now this is the courtyard, and they paint murals. And when they get tired of a mural, they just wash it off and paint another one. And it's all just for fun and done with great spontaneity and joy, totally unplanned. It just grows. Now, it's hard to believe that these kids have never seen a Picasso or a Miro or any of the French contemporary artists, but they haven't. This is what they do when they do what they want. Now we've driven out to the sacred forest, and we're driving along the fence that's around the grove. And these are the spontaneous modelings of the gods whose spirits are enshrined in the forest. You go along and there's just a regular frieze of these. And now we're ready to start up the steps, which are almost like little bowls. And so you have to watch your footing. So it comes to you with a great surprise when you get to the top and see what's there. This incredible structure is one of the gateways to the shrine. You enter the iron gate and then into this structure, which is full of tunnels in which you sort of worm your way through to enter the grove. This is the fence as it looks along the road. This is about 3 miles from Ashogbo itself. Here's a close-up of the shrine, of the gateway to the shrine. And this is the goddess Ocean. I wish I had time to tell you about her. Now, I was thinking that if I were designing a shrine to a forest god, what would I look at in that environment? And as I was thinking about this, I saw this termite sculpture done entirely by termites, and I think this would have, had I had the imagination and the ability to do what those kids did, this might have started me on my way. Now we come back to the United States because I want to say a little bit about art as a family activity where 3 generations can work together. This is a little girl putting the finish on her dollhouse. So she's part of it too. Then we see her father, who's doing some of the things for the dollhouse that she can't do. And here is the dollhouse. The grandfather helped build it. The grandmother sewed curtains and did all kinds of helpful things that only grandmothers know how to do. So here in this simple little thing is an example of a family, grandparents, who, by the way, are the Thiessens of Sac City, their daughter and son-in-law, and now their grandchildren, all doing creative activities together for the pleasure of the children. This is one of my tapestries woven with a needle. I was going to talk a little bit about the 3 kings of the East, but I didn't have time, so I'll just show you the tapestry. Now, since you couldn't see the pieces of paper I held up, I photographed them so you could see where I got the idea for my banner. And here's the go-ahead. Oh, well, sometimes they are upside down. It's that one I didn't use. It said, "Never be this low again." Maybe we should say, "Never be this confused again." Although Emerson said everybody ought to stand on their head and look at the world upside down once in a while. This is the move up that I used at the bottom of the banner, and I used the very same lettering because I realized some people would be afraid to letter. So in this case, I used the same script that was used in the ad. That's beautiful any way you look at it. And here's where I got the grow, which is the real message of the banner. And here's where they expect to revive. Now, I embroidered that on the banner because I think a banner should reward you with a close-up look, but for the most part it should be done quickly and be seen perhaps from a distance. Is that the last slide?
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for your wonderful attention. Please play, please grow, please have a good time, and art will just hatch of itself. Thank you.